My humble respect to Guru Mahan, Guru Piran Sivasankaran, Guru Piranyo, fellow Jnanis. I started the last time of part 2 of chapter 1 in the Katha Upanishad. In this, I spoke about how Lord Yama explains to Nachiketa about the self, and he defines and he gives the characteristics of the self. And we spoke about in this what everything happens because of the self, right? He says the self is behind everything that happens in this phenomenal world. So the world that we live in this material world, he says that, in fact, actually, this world is itself a manifestation of the self, right? And the self here is that cosmic self. He says that, and that's the question that that's the question that Nachiketa is wanting to know. What is this cosmic self? And Lord Yama is explaining to him this transcendental nature of this cosmic self. So he says that, this transcendental nature of this cosmic self is present, whether you are sleeping or whether you're waking or in all the states. He says that, it's all pervasive, right? And somehow, as human beings, we only perceive when we are awake. But here, Lord Yama says it's present in every state. He says only the enlightened souls realize this. That's oneness, sleep state, the deep sleep state, the meditative state, the self, the great self is there. So if that's the case, it even is transcendental to death and so on. So he explains this very, very clearly. So this is what we stopped the last time. And today I'm going to cover that who is the person that knows this, the kind of qualities that one has, right? So he explains this. And in this is on page 122. He speaks about this very clearly. He says that, the person who knows the individual self, in spite of enjoying, so the individual self is a self that we are conscious of the material world and all the experiences. He says that this person, that he knows the individual self, in spite of enjoying the fruits of all the actions, to be the Lord, the divinity of the past, present, and the future. So though you're experiencing this material world, he says that it is, you are aware of it, you know about this in all the states of, your existence, he says. So he says that unity is there, past, present, or future. It's not just now, but, in every state of your existence, you realize this. So the mind is aware of this. The mind experiences this. So he says that the realization of this unity with him means that self, that cosmic self or God. He says, now when you have that, that in deep sleep state, in waking state sleep, in meditative state sleep, with the body or without the body, it is always omnipresent. And the mind becomes aware of that. The mind becomes, there is a sense of realization of that exists. If that is the case, is there anything that you'll be afraid of, right? And this is what he says, that true nature of our existence. And this is what Nachiketa is asking. He says, is there a state that we are transcendental to birth and death? And Lord Yama explains this. He says, yes, while we are awake, we are aware of this individual self. While we are in the deep sleep state, we are also aware of our material personality. Everything is non-existent. The mere fact that we are aware of the non-existent state means that there's something that is a witnesser of that material non-presence of the material personality. That is the cosmic self, he says. He explains that, one experiences that individual self and also that cosmic self. And he says that the cosmic self is the foundation for that individual self. So he explains that. He says the goal of this is that because for most ordinary being, we are aware of it when we awaken, we are interacting with this world and so on. We really don't think about that deep sleep or the deep meditative state, right? He says when you become aware of it, you realize that actually that is the state where this material personality, the material identity, the individual self is not present. Even that is an awareness. He says that who becomes aware of that? Why do we become aware of it? Because of the cosmic self. He says that the goal of life is to realize that the individual self and the cosmic self are one, you see, and the same. He says that is there is that one self, right? So it manifests as this your material personality. It exists in our material world, and it also exists, gives you the non-material personality in the deep sleep state and in the deep meditation state. So he's explaining that, this is what that while we have the material form, we are part of the greater cosmos and the greater cosmic self. This only comes for those who actually introspect deeply, contemplate deeply, and meditate. The mechanical meditation will not give you this. There are people that just sit down and meditate and get a nice, peaceful feeling, and that's it. But they don't take it to another step of this inquiring mind, the mind that says, hey, I'm experiencing this, and I'm also not experiencing anything. The material body and the material faculty and the material personality is present, and it's also present. So in both cases, in the non-present state, how is it that I know that I'm not present? What is it that makes me aware of the non-present state? So there must be something that is omnipresent, right? And that something that is omnipresent is what Lord Yama explains, that cosmic self. It is present when the material personality is not there, and it's present when the material personality is there. A mind that becomes aware of that realizes that that self is transcendental to that material identity. Now he's already giving the clue of this notion of birth and death, what happens after the birth and death. Right? So in this, he goes on to explain that, a spiritual seeker who is able to then distinctively, be able to see distinctively between the being who precedes that element. That means that element is actually the material personality that is dependent on that material elements, which is your faculty, our sensory organs, our brain, all those things. It says. So that precedes that is actually our consciousness. You see. So remember, I said the case where in the deep sleep state that is present, and the waking state it is present. In the meditative state it is present, right? So he says when he says firstborn from the consciousness, right? This is what we see, that if you see from the scientific perspective, nothing, something emerge, our space-time continuum emerge, and everything else follow through. But within that matter, energy, time-bound entities, that firstborn consciousness, which is transcendental to space-time, is present. And we know that in the deep sleep state, and the deep meditation state, and the waking state. He says that. In this, he goes on to say that, who is in the heart of every being, in its organs, in its body, and so on. He says, it is present in everything in this universe. It's imprinted in everything in this universe, right? And he says, this is the true self. He goes on to explain this, right? So he says, that is the self that Nachiketa was asking about. You see? So he knew there's something, but he wasn't sure what it is. So Lord Yama is slowly explaining to him. And why did Lord Yama explain to him? For a simple reason that this boy was not caught up by this material desires and wants. And remember the early part, Lord Yama tested him so that he's not caught up in this material illusion. So what the moral of the story is that when you are in search for the truth, the true self, you see that you don't get allured by this material world. And if you're caught up by this material world, it's very difficult to break those gravity of that material world, that individual self, to know that cosmic self. He says that, in this, he explains that the spiritual seeker is one who is able to see distinctively the being who is preceded the elements. That means before the form and the matter and the energy and the body and all those things, there is something that existed before that. And that something exists in deep sleep when the material body is not present, and the material personality is not present. And the key thing is that he says that is that firstborn consciousness. It's imprinted in everything, right? And to be able to discover that, one needs to be able to go within. And that is where the meditation is so important. So he goes on to explain this. And then he says that something which is very fascinating in passage 7. He says that self of all deity, we have deities, in many, many scriptures. There is so much description of deities or idols, which is an idea of the ideal. He says that too is a manifestation of the cosmic energy. In the various religious order, right? We have many, many deities that manifest as gods. So in this, I have this picture of, this god called, the deity called Hera, which is actually Zeus's wife, right? And it's depicting, it's what we call the god of the gods, right? It's the supreme goddesses that manages, family life, women, protection of birth and materiality. So we see this deity is actually a manifestation of the cosmic energy, which is actually a manifestation of the Brahman. So in all these spiritual teachings and religious teachings, we have so many deities that are manifestation of different forces of nature or universe, which is also a manifestation of that God or the Brahman. So here it goes on to explain how in this case where this deity, which is, although in a depiction of the cosmic energy, in the core of that, a spiritual seeker sees that Brahman, right? So we see that, remember, we define that Brahman manifests as the Hiranyagarbha and all the elements of nature, the forces, and so on. The human mind, takes this different experiences and characterize these forces as deities or gods, right? And he says that while we get so focused on the deities or the idols, it is actually an idea of the idol, an idea of the ideal, which is Brahman itself. So a spiritual seeker actually identifies this deity as Brahman, but in different forms. So in some religions, they have thousands of God, millions of God. What it tells us is that while the gods may form-wise looks different, like in this case, Hera, which is the wife of Zeus, in most other religions you have different gods, they are nonetheless a manifestation of the Brahman. So he says that a true seeker sees this, right? And if that is the case, if Brahman is a manifestation of all these gods, and these gods, you see, have a characterization of a human because it's coming from a human mind, right? The mold of a human mind takes a formless God and gives form. But nevertheless, the form is also a manifestation of Brahman. Very similar. Like you see, you have a gold ring. The original gold has got, it's formless, but it goes through a mold to form a ring or a earring or a bangle. In that same way, the formless Brahman, dimensionless Brahman, that is transcendental to space and time, when it comes through that space and time continuum, it it gives that characterization of that formed, time-bound deity, like gold, right? But yet, for a seeker, he not only sees the form, gold ring or gold chain, but he sees it as gold. So you see that we say gold chain. The chain comes after the gold. So the preeminent place or the position is of the gold. That gold is given the primary role. In that same way, like how a gold chain and a gold earring, we are actually the divinity that is in the human form, right? And that divinity, that self, is what Nachiketa is asking. He's asking about, yes, we have gold ring, gold chain that's got form, but he says, is there something that is transcendental to that form? So he's asking about the gold that can become a ring, that can become all the different elements, different ornaments. In that same way, he says, I see many human forms, many material forms. Is there something that is transcendental to the form? So he's asking, what is it that is transcendental to the gold chain earring? It is that gold. In that same way, what is it that is transcendental to the birth and the death? It is that self or the divinity, right? So the birth of a gold chain, it goes into the mold, it becomes a gold chain. The death of a gold chain is that the goldsmith will melt it and it loses its form. And it's still gold. In both cases, it's gold. In that same way, he's asking, what is it that is transcendental to the form? It is that self, that divinity. So while we have this form, there is something that is formless. But our mind is so caught up in that mold of the form, hence we are unable to break away from that form. And this is where he says, Lord Yama says, that introspection, contemplation, the Nachiketa fire, the various practices to bend inward to become transcendental to that form. He explains this, right? So he's slowly getting Nachiketa to that understanding of the transcendental nature of ourselves. So here then he goes on to explain that it is somewhat like a pregnant woman. In passage 8, he says that, he says it's like a pregnant woman, taking. So though we have this material form, he says that this Hiranyagarbha, or the cosmic womb, comes from that Brahman. And the womb actually looks after this. And I like this passage very much. It says, like a pregnant woman taking good care of the child in her womb. He says, his mother is very careful what she eats, the sleep, and all those things the mother does to ensure that the baby is healthy, the baby is born, in the best possible way. He says, like a pregnant woman taking good care of the child in her womb, those who are alert about their religious duties, that means their spiritual practices, and who are well, who also are well provided with the butter, oil, and other material things, right? Take care of the sacrificial fire nestling between the two fires, he says, and I'll describe what that is. He says between, the spiritual and the material realm. He says, and worship the fire every day. This fire is all-knowing, he says, Spirit, that Brahman. This is truly that self that Nachiketa is searching. So what he's explaining is that, like how we nurture and look after our body, we look after our mind, right? And we make sure that our intelligence is all looked after and not contaminated. He says when the mother eats healthy food, eats good things to keep her body healthy, he says what comes out of that, and of course, that practicing that meditation, that Nachiketa fire, you see, and lighting that fire within oneself, the Tavakana, he says that when one does that, what emerges is a healthy baby. He says when we harness this, he says that what emerges is actually the true self, that awareness of that true cosmic self. He says this is the self that is like how a newborn innocent baby emerges. He says that we have to harness this knowledge, this existence, like how, looking after, our own self in this way, not abuse ourselves, not, abuse ourselves physically, mentally, build up a lot of the toxic relationships, like a mother, if the mother looks after herself, has healthy food, healthy nutrition, good sleep, exercise, what emerges is this innocent, beautiful, healthy baby. In that same way, if we nurture good values, we look after our body with good food, we look after our mind with great practices, spiritual practices, good thoughts, and good practice, good actions. He says that what emerges is this beautiful awareness of that cosmic self. So he says, why most people don't get it is because they contaminate themselves. Like a mother who, when they're carrying the child, they drink alcohol, they abuse themselves, go through difficult relationship problems, mental health, what emerges? A broken child. So in that same way, he says that look after ourselves, our body, our mind, like how a pregnant woman will look after to ensure that the baby is healthy. In that same way, if we look after ourselves, right, that cosmic self emerges in every facet of our lives, in everything that we do, right? If we don't look after it, you see that we get those qualities that has a lot of blemishes that impacts our quality of life. So this is what Swamiji also says in Tamil, Kuraya Nivirthu Kuriya Kurale Kadavul. He says, one who removes all the challenges and the blemishes is God incarnate. So one who's able to remove all the limitations and so on will realize that cosmic self or the divinity of God and be able to see that everywhere. So this is what Lord Yama is explaining to Nachiketa, that he says that within all of us, that cosmic self is there. The only reason why we are unable to access it is because our body is weak, our mind is weak, and our intellect is blunted. It's not sharp enough to be able to pick up that subtlety of that. And to attain that, one needs to keep the body healthy, keep the mind healthy, and mind and body are interrelated. If the mind is healthy, the body will be healthy, and vice versa. And when those two are healthy, the intellect is healthy. When the intellect is healthy, it is sharp enough to have the clarity of understanding what is that individual self and the cosmic self, and realize that they are all the same self with different manifestation. We are all God packaged differently. We are all the gold chain, the gold ring, the gold this, gold ornament, but we are gold. So while we may be different, we all carry that Brahman in us, which is transcendental to birth and death. This is what he is giving this instruction to Nachiketa. Sandosham.